Welcome to IT in Motion, goons and goblins, where we make autonomous IT entertaining and informative. My name is Sun.
And I'm Josh. We're your hosts. Today we are joined by Darin Chambers, Director of Engineering at VERISIGN.
Welcome to the show, Darin.
Welcome, Darin.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Sun.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been in the internet industry for 28 years. I'm married. I've got 4 kids. I'm in a split mode right now. I've got 2 in college and 2 in high school.
There you go.
So it's kind of that borderline edge of seeing a little bit of maybe empty nesters in my future here soon. In this conversation, this will be my opinions.
Right, yeah. That's fantastic. We'd like to get into our icebreaker game, and we're going to ask you a few Halloween-themed questions. All right, so the first question is, what is your favorite scary movie?
Ooh. I wanted to go with this sounds like I should go with something very sarcastic for scary, but I don't watch a lot of scary movies. So that's a tricky one. You know what? Actually, I'll just tell you what scared me the most as a kid. The Blob.
The Blob. Okay,
that
a good
sounds
one.
pretty scary. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking The Exorcist. That was for me at least, right?
Yeah.
Next one going for you. So, what's your favorite Halloween candy? Eat some.
So there's a apple cider candy corn. It's just fantastic.
That's a very fall Halloween themed candy. I love it.
Yeah, apple cider.
All right, so what is spookier for you and why? Ghosts, the Headless Horseman, clowns, or zombies?
Clowns.
And what is it about clowns that scare you?
It's ghosts, Headless Horsemen's. I think there's just a logic behind why it's not real, but clowns are there and they're real. And it's kind of creepy.
And they live in that persona too, right? I mean, they have to really be it to come across as genuine. So that's the thing, is that there's a part of them that's actually like that.
It likes to entertain children?
For better or for worse, man.
Creeps me out a bit, yeah.
Yeah, the next one we have is share a little experience that's probably the most frightening that you've been through in your life, if you can think of one.
Oh. So, most frightening. So I have 2 different thoughts here, but I'm going to go with a weird one because we were talking previously about failure stories and things like that. So I'm going to hit a work-related one.
Okay.
And that was an interesting experience where I'll try to make it very short, but there was a very strange misconfigured client network with some IoT edge type stuff that they were pushing data and it was working, but it shouldn't have. And it did that for several years until some sort of firmware upgrade, switch, change, hardware, something in the middle, broke that thing that should have been broken from the beginning. And, being a managed service provider at the time, the customer called up, said, "Oh, this stopped working, please fix it." So it was hours and hours and hours. And it was one of those things where you end up in the server room, you've been in there for 5 or 6 hours and you're freezing and you're kind of I have thought of everything. You brought other people in, you're looking at stuff. And it's do I even know what I'm doing here? And it's probably not quite themed exactly what you're looking for, but it's just one of those moments where you're working out a problem for 6 hours, 8 hours. And you just think, am I in the right industry, or am I in the right career?
Starts to question your whole expertise, because it just doesn't make sense. That is quite scary. It's like a ghost
Ghost in the Machine.
Ghost in the chamber of Darin in the Chamber of Secrets. Sorry, bad joke. There's actually two. There's two of you. No, there's four of you, right? You have three other brothers. One of them we've held him captive in our office today.
It's right over that way.
Fantastic. Yes. I actually, it's two brothers and a sister. So
Oh,
Two brothers and a sister.
I just offended one. I'm sorry.
All right. What is your best all-time Halloween costume?
Did Beetlejuice, and my wife showed up as the bride from Beetlejuice. I'm in a bowling league, and they like to do a party at the end of the season, and they do a theme for the first night, and I think we took home first prize on the theme nights.
Let's go.
5 years in a row or something like that.
Wow.
You must have looked terrifying.
We looked the part. It was perfect.
Terrific. Excellent. All right. Well, awesome. Well, hey, thanks for jumping into that. You shared with us one of your failure stories. Talk to us about one of your success stories. Brighten the mood a bit.
Yeah. I love the sound effects. Yeah, this was an interesting one. So I think the success story I want to talk about actually starts with somebody else failing, and in a real big lesson of emotional intelligence, empathy, I'm not sure what, this lead R&D researcher actually presented to the engineering department of the company. This was the startup I was last at. The engineering department at the time was about 27 people, and they did an hour-long presentation of what they were trying to do, all the things they had done to try to accomplish it, and why none of them had worked. And then they asked for help. So it was one of those things that was interesting. It's what they were trying to do was take a picture of the underside of a car. So it was a car auction company where they send an inspector out. They take 65, 70 pictures of the vehicle, write up an independent report. But the one thing they couldn't do is they couldn't drive the car into the shop, put it on a lift, get under there and take a picture of the underside. There was just no time to do all of that. So the interesting thing they had done was put in little Raspberry Pi 8 cameras on a basically wooden stick and drug it underneath the car, and we're trying to stitch all these pictures together, and it just was not working. And I was giving it a lot of thought, and I talked to them about, hey, what about using a mirror? And they're like, no, we've already tried this. And the next day, actually, my car battery died, so I had to get it jumped. Been about 5 years since I had a new battery, so I went right to Walmart and like put a new battery in. And I was walking around the store, just wasting a couple minutes, and I saw this tall, skinny mirror that you would like buy and put up on your wall. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm buying this right now. And at lunch that day, I said, I grabbed the R&D guy and said, let's go do a field trip. Let's see if we can get this under your truck. It was a tight fit. And we set up a phone with a video recording on it and drove over this mirror. We had to pause the video and we had to move the mirror because the transmission was hitting it and all that type of stuff. And then we continued the drive over the rest of it. So I took the video files, composed it into a bunch of still images, and then cropped it into this really, really narrow view that was from the camera through the mirror up 2 inches or 3 inches to the bottom of the truck. Tried a bunch of different software, but I found some obscure open source panorama creator and took those 216 images and stitched them together 2 at a time until I had made, by the next morning, I had this very pure, very good looking image of the underside of a car.
Wow.
What is kind of cool about that is they realized that, yes, the mirror does work. And a year later had a software patent on the process and a hardware patent on kind of a foldable device that could use the phone and then run the software on it. You basically set it all down, you hit go, drive over it, and you come out the other side with a picture of the underside of the car.
Wow.
Very cool.
Has that been like, so you guys got a patent on it? Has it been used by others?
Yeah, so the inspection company uses it. They have couple hundred, maybe 500, 600 of them out in the field right now. It actually might even be more than that. And they use, I'm trying to think of how many a day. It's many.
Wow.
It's many. It's at least 400 to 500 of those a day. So are happening all the time.
What year was this?
2019.
Wow.
So pretty recent.
Yeah. Innovation at its best. Let's go.
All right. Well, you've already kind of tipped your hand a little bit at this, but tell us a bit about your work history and your story, your journey.
Yeah. So I think the startup bug is one of the biggest things that defined my my work history. So 4 startups in the course of a total of 15 years. 1 successful exit, which is really good. And then aside from that, a lot of internet infrastructure. So I started in networking. I'd say I moved to software. I went into management, moved to software, went back to independent contributor. Now I'm back in the management track, but also like to stay very highly technical. And from networking to software kind of transitions to doing DevOps before that was even a term. Of course, the cloud, and now doing a lot of on-prem cloud and DevOps.
So over the course of those 4 different companies, what have been your biggest kind of learning lessons? Biggest takeaways?
I mean, startups can be very tough. Biggest takeaway is interesting. I can't gently say don't. This would be something that doesn't coming up again, but don't work for a startup during the .com crash. I mean, that's just it's almost an obvious one. I think the biggest takeaway is really just learning, continual learning, applying, experimenting.
Now you said you had of the 4 startups you're involved in, 1 was successful in getting to be independent or purchased or whatever, but you had 4 of those 4, 3 didn't. So is there anything you learned about why they didn't make it where you wanted to go?
Maybe even some nightmare stories.
Well, the .com crash startup that didn't make it kind of fits a nightmare story. They were a West Coast based startup. The internet was like, oh my gosh, it's the internet, it's taking off. It was shopping, pets.com, that type of stuff that was happening. And actually there's a great Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz has a great, well, I say great book. I think it's a good book. It's been a while since I read it. The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting read for me because as I was reading that book, everything he talked about, the big competitor that already had the early funding and all that type of stuff, that was the company I worked for. They pulled an end around and IPO during the .com crash. So they ended up with the cash to survive the whole lack of clients. But the company I worked for didn't. And the horror story was they did an all hands meeting. This was in the East Coast, actually about half a mile from where you're at right now, Herndon Center Parkway. And they did an all hands meeting. They brought everybody in and they were just finishing out the build out. Literally there was an electrician on a chair screwing in a light bulb, and they're like, there's no money left. You can all go home. And by the way, here's some security guards. Don't steal stuff. This guy on the ladder is just like, what am I hearing? Do I still have a job?
How inconsiderate. They should at least let you steal stuff. I mean, come on.
There were some people trying to take those with fancy airline chairs or whatever out the back, which is honestly kind of sad, but that's
that chair was kind of a big symbol of that era. You'd mentioned that you were involved in the early days of DevOps before it even had that name. And one of the things I know about you is you'd built what I would call a zero trust CI/CD process, right? Like a true CI/CD process. What was the evolution that got to the state where you've got this, deployment where you can check code in and you don't need a lot of administrators with access to systems?
Yeah, so it's really, I think a lot of it's natural evolution. So I think most people in the industry are familiar with CI/CD pipelines and kind of the idea about running things through. I'll talk about one of the popular softwares, Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
Jenkins is interesting. There's often a stage in CI/CD where Jenkins ends up being kind of like the human hands on the keyboard that goes and runs some commands. It could be Terraform, Solid, Ansible, and it goes and puts something somewhere. It's an interesting thing to do. You're automating what is normally done by a human. So there's a new paradigm, which is really, it's showing up a lot more too. Flux, Argo, Harness. You get your artifacts in place. You do the build with something like Jenkins, and then you actually upload your artifacts. And there's a way to state the desired, basically what you want your production cluster to look like. And you let something like Flux do the reconciliation and make it happen.
Right.
So what's really nice about that is you end up with the security artifacts. There's salsa compliance. I'm not saying you get that with this process, but this is a lot of new stuff coming down the pipe and trying to make things basically more secure. What I really like about it is you can actually turn off SSH access to the host.
Wow.
You can have break glass. You can let people connect into it, but you can also throw up an alert on a board saying you have somebody connected to a production server.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from previous experience, I think we went about 3 years with only 3 logins to a suite of production servers in the cloud. And those were on deep troubleshooting exceptions.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's so typical that, problem gets there and an administrator gets in, and then they need a developer, so the developer SSH is in. But being able to have that CI/CD process where you can run things in staging and that convergence of configuration. I mean, the first time I heard about that stuff was probably around 2006 or 2007. I'm trying to remember what tooling it was, but might have been some Red Hat tooling, but there's this idea, right, of every time you make a change to a system, you log in and run a command, it starts to diverge from its desired state. And so you want to, over time, converge. And it sounds like that's a big part of getting that practice to be successful.
Yeah, and the industry there's some new tools becoming available. You mentioned Red Hat. There have some. I'll talk about an interesting project called Talos.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking that manifest-driven application, like let's say Kubernetes deployment or something like that, and it's actually applying it to the server. So you wouldn't have an operator connect up to a server, run a yum update anymore, because that is effectively an anti-pattern. And you can end up with differences in that type of scenario. So you basically define through manifest and code how the system should look like. And the system, the software managing that basically makes it so. What is especially interesting about that is the ability to roll back. I don't know, have you ever tried to roll back a yum update?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to do well.
Yeah.
You're more likely to end up reinstalling once you try, in my experience.
Huh. Things have changed. Everything's evolved over time.
Yeah.
It seems like, Darin, you've gone through the DevOps transformation a few times with some of these organizations. And, I was curious for myself, and maybe even for our listeners, have you seen patterns in that process, right? Things that most companies, hurdles that they have to overcome and keep in mind when making that transformation?
Yeah, actually, so I learned about some of these, doing these transformations and focusing on the right things more recently in my career. So I haven't had the chance to repeat this a whole lot of times. But now that I've seen it, I recognize the patterns too. And a lot of it really comes down to, it's almost a John Doerr type thing, measure what matters. It's getting those measurements, taking a look at stuff. Puppet Labs, the DevOps, State of DevOps report, is actually really telling. If you read the book Accelerate, Half of the book talks about why their methodology is okay, because they do a survey for the methodology, and a whole bunch of math, and they whittle it down to 4 things. And those 4 things you probably have seen are the DevOps, the DORA metrics. Deployment frequency, lead time for changes, MTTR, and change failure rate. So this I have gotten to see a couple times. So at that startup that with the successful exit, there was a point where we deployed once a week. It was about 6 different products. Those 6 products, it was any of the batch of changes that had happened in the last week. So it was a lot of changes at once. And it didn't work that well. The change failure rate, half the deployments we had to roll back. Another half had bugs found later. So the change failure rate was close to 70 to 75% if you measure it really to kind of to the DORA standards. And that was not sustainable. So we went through a process in there to implement a lot of the stuff from the DevOps handbook from Accelerate. And it took about a year, but the change was dramatic coming out the other side. We came out with smaller changes, a lot more of them, clear metrics, and it really did. We got to the state that basically the book Accelerate says, hey, if you do all these things, you'll get there. And we went through it and got there at the same time growing the head count and introducing people to these new methods and all that type of stuff. So yeah, 170 plus changes, deployments a week, anytime. At one point, we just removed all blackout windows. It was definitely a very exciting transformation.
Wow.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a good recommendation. Is there any one thing you think every company, at least who's doing any kind of software development, should know about DevOps?
I think I would say it's difficult to really get your whole head around it and to do the journey. But for the one thing to know, it's worth it. It is definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think more than anything, right? That's probably what companies want to know is, if I invest all this time and effort in changing the process and changing the culture, which are both extremely difficult things to do, what am I getting out of it? Is it worth it? And, is it actually going to make a difference? And so as someone who's done it, you're giving kind of a testimonial that it does.
Just kind of feels like you're walking into a forest with nothing but a candle to guide you, hoping for a way out.
There's a lot of resources, though.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of funny. I was reading the book, the physical book Accelerate. Don't ask me why I listened to this on audiobook, but I was listening to the DevOps handbook.
At the same time.
Just if I was in my car, I listened. If I was sitting around at home, I read.
Yeah.
And then Accelerate's actually pretty. I don't recommend listening to that one. Reading that one's a bit easier. And somewhere around the same time, I read the Phoenix Project is an easy novel.
Yeah.
I think it has some of the same authors. Then Beyond the Phoenix Project is great. And of course, the Unicorn Project. But I read all of those or listened to them in a very short period of time. And at least they're all related. So it's fine.
Yeah. It all probably is kind of just turning around in your mind. And that's how you learn things. Sometimes you just go into and do a lot. Speaking of learning, you've actually made that transition, right, from engineer to manager. And I'm sure you've had to learn a lot doing that. How has that transition been? What have you had to learn to do that?
So again, I love the resources that are available. I've done a lot of reading, though it's not so much a checklist of, do A, do B, do C. I actually do a lot of things kind of off gut and instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a lot of that really from the stuff you consume and the things you read and listen to. I just try to take, bring myself into the position, and I bring a lot of energy into it. And I think the transition's been great. I did it very early in my career and it didn't work so well. I was like, no, I'm going back to independent contributor. This is much better.
Yeah.
I think just with being, more experienced and all that, I have a passion for it, and it's working really well.
Yeah. It seems like, through that process that transition. You've been a lifelong learner. Why is that so important to you? What value you think comes out of that?
I think it makes things interesting. I don't like to sit down and do just one thing. I think if I were still doing the job that I started with my career with 28 years ago, and that's what I was still doing, I'd probably go a bit crazy. It's just not my personality. I can actually tell you, not surprising for a startup, I've automated myself out of a job several times
Nice.
and somehow still had a job. So
Well, if you're that good, they're gonna keep you.
Yeah. That's typically how it goes at any healthy organization. If you can automate your job, they want to keep you so you can go do it again. Do more important stuff.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about a couple of nightmare stories, scenarios. Typically, after those situations, you have to do postmortems of sorts. I've heard you have your approach to how people should conduct postmortems, and you have quite a bit of passion behind it. Can you share that with us?
yeah, so the postmortem, I think that it's actually one of the most powerful tools at any company. And I'm not just saying a postmortem as produce this report, this is what happened. I think it really needs a deep dive. It's the company, I mean, if it's a commercial facing company, effectively, I could probably say for any issue, the company lost money. So they just spent a bunch of money. You may as well show up in class and learn the lessons. And that's the postmortem. So I think the interesting approach is blameless postmortem. Those terms, search it up. There's a ton of stuff about blameless postmortems. You don't attack the person. You just talk about what happened and why. You can put people's names on it, but it again, if for example somebody's messed up, then there might be something around the process that should have more guardrails and things like that. But the postmortem is a lesson. It is a lesson in a live environment that you have. It is a great resource to be able to use. And I like the 5 whys, really drilling down, because somebody's like, hey, why did this fail? I don't know, we can make something up here, but because the file system was full. You could stop there. Oh, file system was full. That's why it failed. Well, no, you ask the question again. Why is the file system full? Oh, because this log wrote a bunch of logs into the log directory. Why did that happen? Okay, you've got no log rotation. You don't have these other protections. You keep asking why till you finally get to the root cause.
Right.
And then you put action items in there. You go fix it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that a lot. And when you think about it, especially when you try and push the no blame postmortem, there's still a lot of emotion involved in that. And, I was thinking, speaking of, that moment, you might feel like I'm not good enough if you were the one that made the mistake. Right. And that kind of leads to maybe even like imposter syndrome.
You're talking about imposter syndrome in the nightmare story at the beginning, right? Where, 8 hours into a problem, you're like, should I even be here?
Yeah. I mean, it's a real thing. I think in this industry, a lot of people bump up against it. And as a quick joke, I like to sometimes think the imposter syndrome has a polar opposite, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't know much and you think you know a lot. But imposter syndrome, it's really tough. I think focusing on successes, even if it is something small, like just writing down, it's like jotting in a journal, things like that you've done well, works great for your year-end review, by the way, if you keep track of things you've done well. But it's also a good reference point of, hey, look, I'm actually good at my job and look what I do. I had a project I was working on in 2016 that was complex. And I got so frustrated with it, I started writing down all the major technologies that we used in this project. And when I got to 27, I'm like, okay, that's enough. And I started going back through the list, and I thought, how many of these are older than 5 years old. And it was 12. So 15 of those major technologies we used had not existed 5 years previously. And I was like, okay, I can be frustrated here because this is a lot of brand new tech and this is a hard problem.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of rough edges with a bunch of new stuff like that, and and just not a deep bench of people who know it, right? There's an old thing I read about when Windows 95 came out and was being heavily publicized. There would be job listings posted, and they would ask for people with 10 years of experience in Windows 95, and it was 1995. So, there's sort of that need, right? You want someone with 10 years of experience in a 2-year-old technology. There's just no one to go to who has that kind of deep expertise. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
One other thing you've talked about with us in the past is you've got a particular note-taking system that you use to help you learn. Do you want to share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do something that's actually goes back to years ago in the industry, and that's the engineer notebook. And I think the engineer notebook has mainly been a physical thing in the past. And the engineers, they write down their daily notes, they go through things. At some point, they file it up on a shelf, and then later you get the next one, you get the next one. But there's some interesting technologies that makes it more usable and searchable. And I think you've probably seen this, Notion, Obsidian, Rome Research. There's a lot of these that kind of talk about how to take notes and how to make them referenceable and usable. I specifically use a VS Code plugin called Foam, and it's actually a play on words to model off of Rome. And really what it is a wiki link.
Right.
Just that you make your own wiki. So I make a file per day. I have some other references too that a file per team, a file per project, a file per person. I really do have files on people. So it is quite interesting.
Wow. Take your note taking real seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually introduced this to my father, who's writing down a lot of his life stories. And he really took to it in the fact that he could think about these things that may be disconnected, and he could make it one single file and just throw down a couple notes into it, and then do a wiki link back to maybe what time of life he had, what state he was in, things like that. And it was neat to see him help him guide up as this connected graph evolved and started showing up. And it allowed him, instead of thinking of a book, when I say a book, instead of thinking it very linear, start at A, go all the way to the end, it became a series of disconnected thoughts. And that was a lot easier for him to start. Something pops in his head and he jots it down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Darin, it's been great talking with you. We appreciate your time. If people want to get to know a little bit more about you, how can they reach out to you, learn more about you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Darin.Chambers. I am on X or Twitter, but I don't do a lot of social networking stuff on that platform. I might see it if you message me, Darin, Darinc. But if we're in the wrap up, I want to hear more about you guys, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But I want to play a little game. So this is one of my favorite things to do with teams. I do like to do a bunch of different team building activities. They tend to be a bit random.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump right into my favorite one.
Let's hear
I'm
it.
going to ask a random icebreaker question I pulled down from the internet.
All right.
To you first, Josh.
Okay.
And then, son, you are going to be the nominated dissenter. And what that means is you have to tell Josh why he's wrong.
So
Okay.
I'm going to pick your favorite song and then...
So I actually came up with
instrument.
this when I had a couple junior engineers on my team who were not speaking up. They just basically stayed quiet. They'd listen to, the principal engineer and just they'd nod. So I wanted to kind of get them to raise their voice up and
You want them to fight. I get it.
be heard. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a real problem with junior engineers, right? They know they don't know a lot, especially when they start seeing these more senior people who really know a lot, really can solve problems. And so they just, yeah, we'll do what he
Shy
says.
away. Yeah.
And, they just kind of sit there. And so getting them to speak up, it's a great idea. So I'm excited for this. Let's see.
You're gonna start a fight between Josh and I after this, aren't you?
I'm actually really excited for it. So I really just grab this down into a file. I cat it. I pipe it to Shuff. I do a head minus a couple just to make sure I'm not asking a really bad question. But number 2 is actually not that bad. Would you rather? So this is for you, Josh. Would you rather live in the ocean or on the moon?
I guess if I had to choose, I would rather live in the ocean. Now, I'll make an assumption on this question that I'm supposed to be a human doing this, and not a creature or of some kind that's supposed to live in this location.
I like it.
So I'd rather live in the ocean because I know that in the ocean there's water available, there's food available. It would take some technology to get to that stuff, but I know that technology exists, right? Nuclear submarines can get oxygen and potable water out of the ocean using their tremendous amount of energy and heat and stuff like that, and these different catalytic processes. And then you could probably capture fish. You could come up and see sunlight and breathe. You could dive down and have it be dark and cool if you want. So you'd have different options. So that's why I would pick that.
And be eaten by sharks. I mean, I think it makes sense to live on the moon because, if you think about it, that's kind of scratching the surface of us learning more about the universe in general, right? That's such a big unknown in our existence, at least in this lifetime right now. And we want to make further progress in exploring that so we know how to survive if a catastrophic incident happens on Earth, like meteor hits us or something along those lines, right? So yeah, Josh, you're wrong. Just kidding.
Josh, son, I appreciate that, but we got to go. Round 2, we're going to go the other way around.
Now he's going to blow back. Let's go.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
If I were to be an expert in something, I think I would like to be an expert in the medical field. And mainly it's because... not because my parents wanted me to do it, but as I got older, what I realized is health is the number one priority in everybody's life. And, if you don't have your health, it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter how much advancements you make in the world. I think being able to not just provide that for your own self and your own family, but give that to folks who might not have access to it also is some of the greatest impact that you can make on the world.
Well, I think if your goal is to make an impact on the world and on people's health, being an expert in the art of persuasion would probably be the best way to go, because you could take sort of those public health approaches where you teach people how to live a healthy life and to take responsibility for themselves. Because as an expert in the medical field, you can only help one person at a time. But if you can, persuade people to live a healthier lifestyle, you could add, millions of cumulative years to people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, I was in sales for that reason. I realized that's the wrong answer. Ooh, just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're boys, I promise.
Son, I think I hear your next career is a persuasive doctor.
That's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what happened in Painkillers, and that didn't work out very well. If you saw that TV show on Netflix. We probably should cut that part out. Maybe not. We'll see. Darin, it's really been wonderful having this conversation with you. I hope we get the opportunity to actually grab lunch together if you're ever in town, especially if you're local, because Eric is, and let us know the next time you're here. And for the audience, I hope you've gotten value from this episode as much as we have. Hopefully we'll see each other next time if Josh and I can make up, Otherwise, you'll only see one of us. Just kidding. Much love to all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, y'all. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Darin.
guys. Have a
Happy
great one.
Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you've enjoyed this week's podcast episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We're hosted on Spotify, YouTube, and many other podcast platforms. We release episodes on a regular basis, and you can watch all of our episodes at ScienceLogic.com/podcasts.